At a glittering restaurant, the music stopped in an instant when a millionaire struck his pregnant wife across the face. He thought his money and arrogance would silence the room, but he never expected the man in the chef's coat to step forward. That man was not just any chef. He was her brother, a Navy SEAL trained to protect and fight. What follows is a confrontation of wealth, cruelty, and unbreakable courage. Trust me, you will not believe how justice unfolds until we dive in. Let us know the time you are listening and where you are tuning in from. Drop a comment below. We would love to hear from you. The chandeliers glowed above the grand dining room, scattering golden light across polished marble floors. Waiters in crisp white shirts moved quickly between the crowded tables, balancing silver trays with glasses that sparkled in the light. The music of a live quartet filled the air, smooth violins weaving a melody that was meant to soothe and impress. Laughter rose from the corners of the restaurant where businessmen celebrated victories and couples toasted anniversaries. At the center table, surrounded by an audience of strangers and acquaintances, a pregnant woman sat with her husband, a millionaire whose name carried weight in every financial circle of the city. For a moment, it appeared to be an evening of elegance, another night in the life of the wealthy. The woman wore a sapphire dress that curved gently over her stomach, her hands folded carefully on the linen tablecloth as if to guard the child she carried. Her eyes shimmered with hope that tonight, perhaps, her husband might show the kindness she once believed he was capable of. But his jaw was tight, his eyes darting with irritation, his fingers tapping against the wineglass as though every sound around him was an offense. The first sign of tension was subtle, a word spoken too sharply, his voice cutting through the music, causing nearby tables to pause their conversations. The woman leaned closer, whispering something soft, her lips trembling with the effort to calm him. But instead of easing, his anger flared hotter. His chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stood, towering above her. Conversations faltered, forks froze halfway to mouths. The quartet faltered on a note and then stopped altogether. And then it happened. His hand rose and crashed across her face with a sound that was louder than the music had ever been. The slap echoed against glass and marble, a brutal punctuation that shattered the illusion of refinement. Her head snapped to the side, her hair whipping across her cheek, her hand instinctively rushing to her stomach as if to shield the unborn child. A glass tipped, wine spreading in a crimson pool across the tablecloth. Gasps erupted across the restaurant. One woman dropped her fork with a clatter. A man muttered under his breath, unable to believe what he had just seen. The waiters froze, unsure if they should intervene or retreat. Every eye turned to the couple at the center table, and every camera phone was lifted almost in unison, screens glowing as strangers documented the shocking fall of a man once respected. The pregnant woman's breath caught in her throat. Her mascara streaked as tears welled and spilled down her cheeks, glistening beneath the chandeliers. She pressed her palm to her reddening skin, her chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. Around her, whispers collided into a wave of disbelief. The millionaire's expression was not of shame, but of rage, as though he believed his wealth granted him the right to humiliate, even to strike, without consequence. His lips curled, his nostrils flared, and for a brief moment he seemed ready to strike again. But the silence of the room pressed against him, the collective judgment of every witness heavy in the air. No one could quite believe what they had seen. Some guests pushed their chairs back, rising slowly as if preparing to leave. Others remained glued to their seats, eyes wide, recording every detail. The violinists lowered their instruments, their bows trembling in uncertain hands. The maitre d' stood frozen near the entrance, torn between protecting the restaurant's reputation and acknowledging the reality that no cover of luxury could disguise. It was not just a slap, it was a declaration of power, of cruelty, delivered against a woman who should have been cherished, especially in her most vulnerable state. And it was a declaration made in front of an audience that would never forget. The chandeliers still glowed, the wine still spread across the linen, but the atmosphere of celebration had vanished. A new silence reigned, heavy and suffocating. No one in that restaurant could believe the millionaire had just done such a thing. The sound of the slap still lingered in the air long after his hand had fallen. For a moment, no one breathed. The entire restaurant seemed suspended in silence, as if the chandeliers themselves had frozen mid-glow. Then the silence fractured into whispers, 1,000 fragments of disbelief scattering across the room. The pregnant woman sat motionless, her face turned to the side where his palm had struck. A single tear clung to her lashes before sliding down her cheek, leaving a dark trail through her mascara. Her hand shook as she tried to lift a napkin from the table, but her fingers trembled so badly that the fabric slipped through them. She pressed her other palm against her stomach, as if every instinct in her body demanded that she protect the fragile life inside her. The weight of humiliation pressed on her shoulders, and she felt the eyes of every guest digging into her skin. She could hear the scrape of chairs as people shifted uneasily, the clink of a fork dropped onto a plate, the faint buzz of a phone camera recording. Every sound was sharper now, echoing in her ears like glass breaking. At the next table, a woman gasped softly, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. A man muttered, his voice heavy with disgust, but he did not rise to intervene. The waiters stood frozen near the edges of the room, their trays still balanced in mid-air. The quartet no longer played. Their instruments hung useless in their laps, their eyes wide and unsure. The pregnant woman tried to steady her breathing, but her chest rose and fell in shallow bursts. Her mascara smeared further as more tears spilled, staining the sapphire fabric of her dress. She glanced down at the table, at the red pool of wine spreading like blood across the pristine linen. The stain seemed to grow larger with every passing second, swallowing the perfection of the evening just as her husband had shattered her dignity. She could feel the heat of his anger still radiating beside her. She dared not look at him. She feared another strike, another explosion of violence. But the weight of silence pressing in from all directions seemed to hold him back for the moment. The whispers grew louder, words carried from one table to another like wildfire. "Did he just hit her?" one voice hissed. "She's pregnant," another voice murmured, sharp with outrage. The woman heard them, and each word cut deeper than the slap itself. They were witnesses not only to her pain but also to her shame. She felt small beneath the weight of their stares, a fragile figure crumbling in the center of the glittering stage her husband had turned into a courtroom. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, trying to keep herself from collapsing completely. The violinists shifted in their seats, bows trembling. Somewhere in the back of the restaurant, a glass shattered as a guest dropped it in shock. The sound was sharp, a cruel reminder of how fragile everything was, including her own composure. The maitre d' hovered near the doorway, his face pale, torn between duty and fear. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. The millionaire had silenced not only his wife but the entire room. The pregnant woman blinked against the tears that blurred her vision. She could barely hear her own heartbeat over the rising wave of murmurs. Her body trembled, and she reached once more for a napkin, finally managing to grip it. She pressed it against her cheek, though it did little to hide the redness or the humiliation. A child's laughter from another table rang out for an instant before being hushed quickly by embarrassed parents. The sound was a cruel reminder of the innocence she carried within her. She swallowed hard, her throat burning, her breath catching on the edges of a sob. No one at the restaurant spoke loudly, yet the atmosphere was suffocating with judgment. The chandeliers still glowed above, but the light felt harsher now, exposing every tear, every tremble, every crack in her dignity. She had been reduced from the image of elegance to a symbol of public shame in a matter of seconds. She closed her eyes briefly, praying for strength, for the ground beneath her chair to open and swallow her away from the piercing eyes. But the whispers kept growing, the cameras kept recording, and the truth was etched into the air. He had struck her, and everyone had seen it. Nothing could erase the silence that followed, nor the unbearable weight of being abandoned in plain sight. The silence in the restaurant grew unbearable, thick as smoke, and all eyes rested on the man who had just struck his pregnant wife. For a moment, the millionaire's jaw clenched and his nostrils flared, but then his expression shifted. The fury that had twisted his face melted into a mask of composure. He straightened his jacket, adjusted his cufflinks, and forced a hollow smile, as though he believed he could erase what everyone had just witnessed with charm and words. "Please," he said loudly enough for the nearest tables to hear, his tone calm but sharp. "Do not misunderstand. She overreacted. She has been under a lot of stress, hormones, emotions, all of it." His voice carried the confidence of a man used to being believed. The woman remained silent, her cheek still burning, her hand pressed protectively against her stomach. Her mascara streaked her face, a visible testimony no words could erase. But the millionaire pressed on, eager to rewrite the story before it spread further. "You all saw," he continued, gesturing with open palms as if appealing to reason. "She became emotional. I tried to calm her, that was all. Nothing more." His tone sharpened into irritation as he added, "She needs rest, not judgment." A murmur spread through the restaurant. Some guests frowned, others shook their heads. The excuses sounded thin, even insulting, but the man delivered them with the same authority he used in boardrooms and negotiations. He had built his empire on words that bent reality. Tonight, he was trying to bend it again. He leaned toward his wife, his voice low but not soft, meant to be overheard by those nearby. "You made a scene. You always do this. You embarrass me." His hand hovered near her shoulder, not in comfort but in possession. She flinched at the movement, which only deepened the unease rippling through the crowd. One of the violinists muttered under his breath, setting his bow down completely. A woman at the far side of the room shook her head and whispered, "He is blaming her." The comment traveled quickly, picked up by other lips, turned into a chorus of disbelief. The millionaire's mask slipped slightly. Anger tightened his features again, but he forced another smile, his teeth flashing under the chandelier light. "Do not believe every rumor or every reaction you see," he declared. "I love my wife. She knows that. We have challenges, like every couple, but I provide for her. I give her everything." His words rang hollow, colliding with the memory of his hand across her face. The pregnant woman shifted in her seat, her eyes glistening, her lips parting as if to speak, but fear silenced her. The millionaire seized the silence as proof of his version. "You see," he said, addressing the room, "she has nothing to say, because she knows I am right." Gasps and scoffs rippled through the tables. A guest near the bar whispered to his companion, "He thinks money makes him untouchable." Another raised a phone higher, ensuring the man's words were recorded alongside his earlier violence. The millionaire tapped the stem of his wineglass with one finger, trying to restore the rhythm of the evening. "Let us not ruin this beautiful night," he announced. "Eat, drink, enjoy yourselves. There is nothing more to discuss." His voice cracked slightly at the end, betraying the strain beneath his polished exterior. But the illusion was already broken. The crowd had seen the slap, heard the excuses, felt the disdain dripping from every justification. His attempt to rewrite the moment as a misunderstanding only deepened the outrage simmering in the room. He had not calmed the storm. He had only revealed the arrogance that fueled it. The pregnant woman lowered her gaze, her tears falling silently onto the tablecloth stained with wine. She knew the truth, and so did everyone else. The restaurant doors to the kitchen swung open, breaking the tension like a sudden drumbeat. At first, it seemed like nothing more than another server carrying out a tray, but the figure who stepped through was not a server at all. He wore the chef's white coat, sleeves rolled up, apron dusted with flour and faint stains of sauce, but there was something about him that made the air shift. His frame was broad, his shoulders square, his stance firm. Every movement radiated discipline and control, a quiet authority that had nothing to do with the kitchen. Guests turned their heads in unison, conversations hushed. The millionaire froze for a fraction of a second, his smirk faltering as his eyes landed on the man in the doorway. The pregnant woman lifted her tear-stained face, confusion flickering across her eyes before recognition dawned. Her breath caught. The man standing there was not just a chef. He was her brother. He had spent years serving silently behind the swinging doors of the restaurant, preparing meals for the wealthy who barely noticed his presence. Tonight he stepped forward, not as an unseen worker but as a force. His jaw was set, his eyes locked on the millionaire, with a look that could cut steel. "Enough," he said, his voice low yet carrying through the hushed dining room. The word landed like a gavel. Every guest felt it. The millionaire shifted uncomfortably, forcing a laugh that sounded brittle. "And who might you be to interrupt this evening?" he asked, trying to recover his composure. The chef's gaze did not waver. He moved slowly across the room, each step deliberate, his boots striking against the polished floor with a steady rhythm. The waiters stepped aside, instinctively creating a path. The quartet remained silent, their instruments resting useless in their laps, their eyes fixed on the confrontation. The pregnant woman whispered his name, barely audible, but the sound carried enough weight to still the murmurs around her. She had not expected him to be here. She had not even known he worked in this place. Yet here he was, standing between her and the man who had just humiliated her. The millionaire tried again, his words sharp and arrogant. "This is a private matter. Return to your kitchen and mind your pots and pans." The chef stopped directly beside his sister. He looked at her first, his eyes softening as he saw the streaks of mascara, the redness of her cheek, the way her hand clutched her stomach in fear. His jaw tightened again as he turned back to the millionaire. "No," he said firmly. "This is no longer private. Everyone here saw what you did." Gasps and murmurs rippled once more through the restaurant. Some guests leaned forward in their seats, eager, nervous, sensing that the tide was shifting. Phones tilted higher, recording not only the violence but now the confrontation. The millionaire's face darkened. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he snapped. "Yes," the chef replied, his voice steady. "I know exactly who you are, and I know exactly what you just did." The words hung in the air, sharp and immovable. The millionaire's confidence faltered again, the mask slipping further from his face. His eyes darted to the guests, to the phones raised high, to the silent witnesses whose judgment weighed heavier by the second. The pregnant woman exhaled shakily, her tears slowing. For the first time that night, she felt a sliver of safety, a barrier between her and the man who had struck her. She leaned slightly toward her brother, her body trembling but her spirit beginning to steady. The chandelier lights reflected in the polished floor as the two men stood facing each other, one fueled by arrogance, the other by resolve. The crowd held its breath, sensing that the balance of power in the room had shifted. The chef's final words cut through the silence with undeniable force. "You will not touch her again." The silence that followed the chef's words was deafening. Every guest in the restaurant could feel the shift in power, but the millionaire was not ready to surrender. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, and his face flushed with anger. He leaned forward across the table, his hand gripping the back of his wife's chair as though he still possessed control. "You do not belong in this conversation," he hissed at the chef, his voice low but sharp enough for the nearest tables to hear. "This is between me and my wife." The chef did not flinch. His presence was steady, his shoulders squared, his eyes unwavering. The tension in the air thickened, wrapping around every witness like a coil. The millionaire straightened suddenly, forcing a laugh that rang hollow. He addressed the room, spreading his arms as though he were still the host of the evening. "Do not listen to him. He is a nobody in a dirty apron. I am the one who built empires, who pays the bills, who commands respect. Do you really think I would ever risk everything for a simple mistake?" His voice grew louder, more defiant, but the strain in his tone betrayed him. A few guests shook their heads, others muttered under their breath. Phones were still lifted, red recording lights blinking like tiny eyes, capturing every second of his unraveling. The millionaire's gaze snapped back to the chef. His lips curled into a sneer. "Do you know what I can do to you? With one call, I could ruin this restaurant, shut it down before tomorrow morning. You would be unemployed, forgotten, crawling back to whatever hole you came from." The pregnant woman winced at his words. She kept her eyes down, her hands clutching her stomach, but her shoulders trembled. The crowd around them grew restless, the whispers swelling into something louder. Outrage mixed with fear. The chef remained calm, his voice low and steady. "Threats do not erase what happened. Everyone here saw it. Everyone here heard it." The millionaire slammed his palm onto the table, rattling the cutlery and making wine glasses tremble. "I will take everything from her," he snarled, pointing at his wife. "She will walk away with nothing. No house, no money, no child. I will make sure of it." The words landed like daggers, slicing through the heavy air. Gasps echoed from the guests. A woman at a nearby table clutched her chest in shock. A man muttered, "He just threatened to take her child." The murmurs spread quickly, outrage pulsing like a wave. The millionaire, fueled by his own fury, pressed harder. "Do you hear me?" he growled at his wife. "One signature, and you will lose everything. I will see to it that you leave with nothing but shame." Tears welled again in the woman's eyes, but she no longer appeared broken. There was a shift, subtle but present, as if his cruelty had pushed her closer to a line she was no longer willing to cross. She raised her chin slightly, though her lips trembled. The chef stepped forward, closing the gap between them. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of authority. "You will not threaten her again!" The millionaire's face twisted with fury, but beneath it was something else, a flicker of unease. His threats, once enough to silence boardrooms and bend rivals, were losing their power in the face of so many witnesses. The chandeliers gleamed above, casting sharp light on the confrontation below. The entire restaurant seemed to pulse with anticipation. The chef stood unshaken. The pregnant woman drew her first steady breath in minutes, and the millionaire realized that his threats were no longer enough to control the room. The tension had reached a peak, and there was no turning back. The millionaire's threats still echoed when he pulled a folder from the inside pocket of his tailored jacket. The movement was sudden, calculated, meant to seize back control. He slapped the papers down onto the table with a crack that startled the nearest guests. Wine glasses rattled, silverware shifted. The crimson stain of spilled wine spread further across the linen, now creeping toward the sharp edges of the documents. "Sign," he ordered, his voice loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. "Sign now, and you will be free. Walk away with nothing, or resist and lose even more." Gasps spread across the room. The diners could not believe what they were seeing. A man forcing his pregnant wife to sign legal documents in public. The phones rose higher, lenses focusing, capturing every second. The atmosphere shifted again, no longer one of silent discomfort but of collective outrage. The woman stared at the papers, her eyes blurred with tears, but she could still see the bold letters at the top of the page. Divorce, property, custody, the words cut like knives. Her hand trembled as he shoved a pen into her palm. "Do it," he growled, his hand pressing down on the back of her chair. "Sign it now before all these witnesses, and show them you understand who holds the power." Her fingers closed around the pen. The room seemed to spin, the chandeliers above blurring into streaks of gold. She could hear the whispers rising around her. "This is cruel. She is pregnant, for God's sake. He cannot do this here." But he could, and he was. Her brother, the chef, moved closer, his fists clenched at his sides. His instinct screamed to intervene, but he held for a moment, watching her, giving her the choice to decide. The weight of her humiliation was heavy, but he knew she was stronger than the millionaire believed. The woman lifted the pen, her hand trembling violently. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered, "You are destroying me." The millionaire smirked, his eyes gleaming with victory. "Exactly. In front of everyone. You will be nothing when I am finished." The words ignited a wave of murmurs, louder this time, filled with outrage. Guests rose from their chairs, some demanding the maître to step in, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The cameras recorded everything, the glowing screens multiplying the shame. The pen hovered above the paper, her hand shaking. She could feel the weight of the unborn child within her, the heat of her brother's protective presence behind her, and the cold pressure of her husband's grip on her chair. Finally, she let the pen fall to the table with a soft clatter. She buried her face in her hands, sobs shaking her shoulders. The millionaire snatched the pen back up, holding it high as if her refusal was irrelevant. "You will sign?" he barked. "If not tonight, then tomorrow. But you will sign, and you will leave with nothing. Do not think for a moment that anyone here can save you." The words struck the room like a slap to every witness. The cruelty was no longer hidden behind charm or excuses. It was bare, vicious, undeniable. The chef stepped forward then, his body blocking his sister from the millionaire's reach. His jaw was clenched, his voice low but carrying, "Enough, this ends here." The millionaire sneered, his arrogance unbroken. But for the first time, the eyes around him did not carry respect or fear. They carried judgment. Phones recorded, guests whispered, and the weight of public humiliation settled over him as heavily as it had over her. The night that began with chandeliers and music had turned into a stage of cruelty and shame, and the whole world was watching. The pen still lay on the table, untouched, gleaming under the harsh chandelier light. The millionaire glared at it as if his wealth and power alone could force the ink onto the paper. He loomed over his wife, shoulders tense, jaw rigid, ready to strike again if she defied him further. The restaurant was silent, except for the soft hum of recording phones and the ragged sound of the woman's breathing. For several moments she sat hunched in her chair, her face buried in her hands, her body trembling with shame. But deep inside her, something began to shift. She felt the warmth of her brother's presence at her side, the steady anchor of his protection. She heard the murmur of the crowd, voices laced with outrage and disbelief at the cruelty they had witnessed. And she thought of the child inside her, a heartbeat waiting to enter the world. The humiliation that weighed on her heart began to change into something sharper, harder, unbreakable. Slowly, she lowered her hands from her face. Her eyes were swollen and red, her cheeks streaked with tears, but there was a new steadiness in her gaze. She straightened in her chair, shoulders back, her breathing deepening as she found the strength she had thought was lost. The room seemed to lean in with her, the crowd sensing a transformation in the air. The millionaire smirked, mistaking her movement for surrender. He shoved the pen toward her once more. "That is better," he sneered. "Now sign, and we can all move on." She looked up at him then, her voice trembling at first but growing stronger with every word. "No," she said. The single syllable sliced through the silence of the restaurant. "I will not sign." The crowd erupted into gasps. The chef's jaw tightened, his fists clenched at his sides, pride flashing briefly in his eyes. The millionaire's face darkened instantly. "What did you say?" he hissed. She stood. Her legs shook, but her stance was firm, her chin lifted. The sapphire dress clung to her frame, her tears still visible, but she looked taller now, stronger, as if reclaiming the dignity he had tried to crush. "You think I am weak," she said, her voice ringing louder than before. "You think I will let you humiliate me forever. But you are wrong." The millionaire lunged forward, his hand reaching toward her shoulder, but the chef stepped between them, blocking him with a force that silenced any attempt to push past. The millionaire stopped, his fury boiling but restrained by the wall of muscle and resolve that was her brother. The woman's voice continued, now steady, now fierce. "You cannot take everything from me. You cannot take my child. You cannot erase who I am. Not with money, not with threats, not with violence." The whispers in the crowd grew into murmurs of approval. A man at the back clapped once, hesitant but supportive. A woman near the bar whispered, "She is fighting back." The cameras kept recording, capturing every word, every expression. The millionaire's hands trembled with rage, his confidence crumbling. "You will regret this," he spat. "No," she replied, her eyes locked on his. "You will." "Lie?" The crowd gasped again, the air buzzing with electricity. The moment marked a shift, a line drawn in front of everyone. The woman who had been humiliated was no longer silent. She was no longer broken. The chandeliers glowed above her, casting light on her defiance. The restaurant that had once been a prison of shame now became her stage of resistance. And for the first time that night, she felt the weight of strength, not weakness, settling into her bones. The turning point had come, and she was no longer afraid. The restaurant buzzed with tension after her refusal. The crowd whispered, phones still raised, the air thick with anticipation. The millionaire seethed, pacing slightly beside the table, his fists clenched. His wife stood tall now, no longer shrinking under his shadow. Yet the moment was about to tilt even further, for her brother had not yet revealed the full measure of his presence. The chef slowly removed his apron, folding it neatly and placing it on the back of a chair. The room watched in silence, unsure why such a simple gesture carried so much gravity. When he straightened again, his posture was different, sharper, more commanding. He was no longer simply the man behind the kitchen doors. The millionaire laughed bitterly, trying to claw back authority. "Look at him, a cook in a stained coat, pretending to matter. Do you really think anyone here will take your side over mine?" His voice rose, but it carried desperation now, not confidence. The chef reached into his coat pocket and drew out a small leather wallet. With deliberate calm, he flipped it open and held it high. The diners leaned forward. Inside was an identification card, bearing an insignia recognizable to anyone who had ever read a headline. The emblem of the United States Navy SEALs glinted under the chandelier light. Gasps spread across the room. A murmur rippled like a wave. The pregnant woman's lips parted in shock as tears filled her eyes again. But this time they were tears of relief, of recognition. The chef's voice was firm, controlled, but it carried the weight of authority forged in battles far harsher than this dining room. "You may have money, you may have power, but you cannot erase the truth, and you cannot harm my sister while I stand here." The millionaire's face drained of color. He stepped back, eyes darting from the badge to the crowd. Guests whispered louder now, some recording close-ups of the identification card, others exchanging astonished glances. The chef continued, his words precise and cutting. "I served my country. I fought to protect those who could not protect themselves. And tonight, I stand to protect her. You thought she was alone. You thought no one would see. But I see. They all see. And the evidence of your violence is already in the hands of everyone in this room." He gestured toward the glowing phones held aloft. Screens shone like dozens of tiny spotlights, each one capturing not only the slap but the threats, the humiliation, and now this revelation. The millionaire tried to laugh again, but the sound cracked and faltered. "You think a badge changes anything? This is my city, my empire. These people live off my money." The chef's eyes narrowed. He pulled a folded envelope from his jacket and laid it on the table beside the stained divorce papers. "Not anymore. I have proof of your hidden accounts, your fraudulent contracts, your bribes. The world will see not only what you did to her but what you have been hiding for years." The millionaire froze, his chest heaving, sweat beginning to form at his temple. His arrogance crumbled under the weight of exposure. The diners murmured louder now, some gasping, others nodding as the truth unfurled before them. The pregnant woman stepped closer to her brother, her voice steady, though soft. "I thought I was alone. I thought no one would believe me." Her brother placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You were never alone, and now everyone believes you." The restaurant erupted into a chorus of whispers and exclamations. Phones tilted higher. The crowd was no longer passive witnesses, but active participants in her vindication. The millionaire staggered back, his mask shattered. The truth was out, and there was no way to silence it. The weight of the chef's words lingered like thunder after a storm. The restaurant was no longer a place of luxury and indulgence, but a courtroom where judgment fell, not from a bench, but from the eyes of every witness. The millionaire, once untouchable, now stood trembling at the edge of collapse. His face glistened with sweat under the chandeliers. He tugged at his collar, desperate for air, his bravado cracking. He scanned the crowd, searching for a single sympathetic face, but found only contempt. Every camera phone remained raised, the glowing screens recording his downfall. At the back of the room, a journalist who had been dining quietly slipped away, already calling an editor. "You will want this," he whispered into the phone. "It is bigger than anything we expected." 1. The millionaire slammed his hand on the table again, trying to regain control. "Do you all know who I am?" he barked. "I own buildings in this city. I fund charities. I control contracts. Without me, half of you would not even have jobs." But his words, once heavy with influence, now sounded pathetic. A man near the bar shouted back, "Not anymore. We all saw what you did." The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. The authority he had wielded for years dissolved in an instant, replaced by scorn. The chef laid a steady hand on his sister's shoulder, guiding her gently away from the table. The millionaire reached out as if to stop them, but no one in the restaurant moved to help him. Instead, several guests stepped subtly in his path, their silent bodies forming a barrier. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He snatched it out, only to see message after message flashing across the screen. Stock alerts, emails from board members, news updates spreading like wildfire. His company's name was already trending, not for profit margins or successful deals, but for scandal. "Sell-off starting," one message read. "Crisis meeting needed immediately," another demanded. The millionaire's hands shook as he scrolled, his vision blurring. He could almost hear the sound of numbers collapsing, empires crumbling. His wealth, the shield he believed made him invincible, was slipping through his fingers. Then came the final blow. The restaurant doors opened, and 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside. The chatter fell silent at once. Their eyes scanned the room, landing quickly on the scene at the center. One officer approached, his voice firm but calm. "Sir, we need you to come with us." The millionaire's face drained of color. "This is absurd," he stammered. "You cannot arrest me." "Do you know who I am?" The officer's response was simple. "Yes, and that is exactly why we are here." "Also, Gasps rippled through the room as the officers took his arms. He resisted for a moment, jerking back, but the cameras caught everything. The sight of his wrists being held firmly, the image of him dragged from the center of the glamorous restaurant, became the symbol of his ruin. The crowd did not cheer, but their silence was louder than applause. Their judgment was final. His empire had collapsed, his reputation was destroyed, and his power was gone. The pregnant woman, her face still streaked with tears, lifted her eyes to her brother. She saw not just her protector, but the man who had given her the courage to stand. For the first time that night, she allowed herself a breath that did not tremble. The millionaire's last words as he was led out echoed across the restaurant. "This is not over. You will regret this." But his voice cracked, and no one believed him anymore. The price had been paid, and the whole world was watching. The restaurant was still buzzing long after the millionaire had been escorted out by the police. The doors closed behind him with a heavy finality, leaving the crowd stunned, murmuring, and replaying the events they had just witnessed. The chandeliers still glowed, but the atmosphere had shifted completely. No longer did the room carry the suffocating weight of humiliation. Now it pulsed with a sense of justice, of balance restored. The pregnant woman stood near the center table, her tears drying slowly on her cheeks. Her sapphire dress was wrinkled, stained by wine and mascara, yet her posture was different now. Her shoulders were no longer bent under the weight of shame. Her chin was lifted, her breathing was steady. For the first time in what felt like years, she felt herself again. Her brother stood close beside her, his presence solid and protective. He had not left her side once, and the quiet strength in his eyes reminded her that she was no longer alone. The crowd, once strangers, had become witnesses not only to her suffering but to her resilience. They saw her stand, they heard her refuse, and now they looked at her with respect instead of pity. A woman approached from a nearby table, her voice soft. "You were brave tonight," she said, her hand resting lightly on the woman's arm. "You showed us all that no one deserves silence." Others nodded, murmuring agreement, their faces lit by admiration. The woman smiled faintly, her lips trembling. "I thought I had nothing left," she admitted, her voice quiet but firm. "But I was wrong. I still have myself. I still have my child. And that is everything." Her brother placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. "You have more than that," he said. "You have truth, and truth does not break." She closed her eyes briefly, letting the words settle into her heart. She had been humiliated, threatened, and nearly broken, but she had also endured. She had refused to surrender to fear. Now, standing in the same room where she had once been crushed, she felt the power of survival rising inside her. The maitre d', who had watched silently from the doorway, approached cautiously. "Madam," he said with a respectful bow, "your table will remain at your disposal for as long as you need, and tonight your meal is on the house. It is the least we can do." His words were small compared to her ordeal, but they carried sincerity. She thanked him, though she knew the meal did not matter anymore. What mattered was that she had been seen, and she had been believed. The truth was no longer hidden. Her brother guided her toward the exit. The crowd parted naturally, creating a pathway lined with nods of respect. Some guests applauded softly, not in celebration of the spectacle, but in acknowledgement of her courage. The sound echoed gently under the chandeliers, carrying her forward with dignity. Outside, the cool night air wrapped around her like a balm. The stars shimmered above the city skyline. She drew in a long breath, releasing the last remnants of fear clinging to her chest. She looked at her brother, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I thought he would take everything," she whispered. "He tried," her brother replied, "but you still stand, and standing is victory." Lung. Her hand rested on her stomach. She felt the faint stir within, the life that had endured alongside her. She smiled, this time not with trembling lips but with quiet strength. "We will be all right," she said softly, as if speaking to the child. "No one can take that from us." The night had begun with cruelty, but it ended with liberation. She walked into the future not as a broken woman but as a survivor, a mother, and a fighter. No betrayal, no violence, no false power could ever hide the light of truth again.